Well, it looks like 9 o'clock to me. Let's get started early. Welcome to all of you. I can't believe it. We're here. We've been thinking about this for 3 years. Well, my name is Theron Dunn, and mostly I just want to welcome you all, tell you how glad we are that you're here and how glad we are that you've supported us all these years. We certainly would not be able to do this if you did not do that for us. You've been wonderful. We wouldn't do this if you didn't keep coming, if you didn't keep supporting us. I do have to give a special shout out of thanks to our lead sponsors, the Nantucket Athenaeum, the White Elephant, Margaret Ritchie Battle Foundation, but there's so many more people that have done so much. So please look at your programs and see who makes this all possible for us to do. I will say we have one mention of a cancellation. James McBride, who we were all looking forward to seeing tomorrow at 11, is unable to be with us. The good news, the bad news is that. The good news is that his daughter is in labor and he just couldn't leave her. She's 2 weeks early, and it's actually his niece, but he raised her as his daughter, and we all understand and are happy for him. It is my great pleasure to hand you over to Betsy Tyler, who is going to introduce Ben Shattuck and Nat Philbrick. Betsy is our noted historical researcher here in Nantucket and author of many books, and she is also a friend of Nat and Ben. So she's going to tell us about them. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. This is really an elevated position here. Our first talk today is a conversation between two writers, Nat Philbrick and Ben Shattuck, who decided to follow in the footsteps or horse steps of two famous men, George Washington and Henry David Thoreau. Nat Philbrick, who doesn't really need much of an introduction here, burst on the literary scene back 22 years ago with In the Heart of the Sea, a National Book Award-winning title, and has since authored numerous award-winning books about desperate men in impossible situations. He got to know George Washington through extensive research for his recent, highly acclaimed Revolutionary War trilogy. In Travels with George, Nat traveled by car with his wife Melissa and dog Dora through the same towns Washington visited and slept in the brand new United States of 1789. Nat will be chatting with Ben Shattuck, a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and winner of the PEN American Best Debut Short Story Prize and the Pushcart Prize. Ben is the director of the Cuttyhunk Island Writers Residency, and he's the owner of a general store in South Dartmouth, Massachusetts, and he's a very talented artist. He has written his first book, first of many to come, I'm sure. It's called Six Walks in the Footsteps of Henry David Thoreau. And it's a series of journeys undertaken to better know both Thoreau and himself. So please join me in welcoming Nat Philbrick and Ben Shattuck.
Take the bigger one. We were going to fight over this, but we were going to fight over who got the bigger throne, and then we're going to just call it Game of Thrones,
right?
Literary style.
Right. Well, okay. We'll
half
switch.
An hour just wrestle up here.
Well, thank you for deferring. Well, it's great to be here with you. And Ben has a long-term Nantucket connection. You've been doing all sorts of research here, and you're a Verney Fellow, and
yeah, I know Betsy very well. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I was at the Nantucket Historical Association back in 2015. You might all remember that is the year of when the snow. I was here in October, November when that snowstorm came through, and the waves turned to slush, and those beautiful photographs of almost sculpted waves were circling around the country.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking about is you write fiction. I'm known for history. And this Travels with George was a real change for me, going from straight history to part memoir, part travelogue, and following a historical figure And today, you're a fiction writer, and it's kind of ironic that your first book is a travelogue nonfiction. So we're kind of meeting at a common ground, coming from different places. And my question for you is, yes, being a fiction writer, why did you do this book? Was this a way to get out of yourself? Was it a way to get into yourself? Was it a way to ground yourself in, reality? What was happening?
Thanks for that question, Matt. Well, first of all, let me say, it is so strange that this is the first book across the finish line, the publishing finishing line. I would have never approached a publishing house with a book proposal following Henry David Thoreau. It happened accidentally, but I have loved writing it. Something I've realized, and maybe we can talk about this, the difference between fiction writing, nonfiction writing, memoir, biography, and whatever my book really is it's so, I found it so relaxing because in fiction writing, you have these big blocks of plot, character development, character believability, the quality of the prose. And it's like you just do this heavy lifting to push them back and forth to get this story arc that then might mean nothing and might be boring or might, it's all up in the air. But nonfiction writing I find so satisfying because it's like I experienced it. It's like having this sort of like tight line, like a laundry line of fact that you just follow, and then you get to hang the cloth of, to extend the metaphor, the cloth of your thoughts just on the line, and you just follow that line, and you just have these sort of like draping thoughts, and that's what my book is like. It takes many, many detours, and you get to see what happens when you apply some perspective, some fact, something else, and see how those sort of like cloths move in the wind. I loved that in nonfiction writing. And in fiction writing, it's just like every day seems like it bears existential questions of why I'm doing this.
Well, for me, I had finished the third book about the American Revolution. It was 10 years, 2 years longer than it took to fight the damn revolution. And I don't get out much, do not live a very glamorous life. And I live on Nantucket. And I grew up in that nautical center of the universe, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and developed an improbable love of sailing and would drive around the country with my sunfish on the top of my VW Bug, and I loved being on the road. We moved here. We've been here for 36 years, and it's really hard to go on a road trip when the island's 14 miles long. When I get an audio, you get the audio of your book before the book comes out, and you want to listen to it, and so I'd put the first disc in the car and to listen to the first chapter, and I'd do 3 laps around the island before chapter 1 was over. So I finish up this third book, and I said, I just need something different. And many years ago, when I was just transitioning, we had moved here. I was a sailing journalist when we got here, but Moby Dick was my favorite novel of all times. It's a way to get into and it got me way into the history. And so I'm beginning to think, well, maybe I should try that. And there was I learned that there was going to be a Steinbeck and the Environment Conference on Nantucket, sponsored by the Nantucket Field Station, Wes Tiffany and Susan Beagle and some others. And I was a huge Steinbeck fan. And Travels with Charlie, the greatest nonfiction book ever written about being on the road. And so I wrote this essay. They got in. I was like, okay. So we went to the reception at the Jared Coffin House. And what was really cool about it was Elaine Steinbeck, John Steinbeck's widow, 78 years old. This was the first time she had decided she'd come to an academic conference. And so all these academic bigwigs are there, and the big question is, who is going to sit next to Elaine? And Susan says, Nat, Melissa, no one knows who you are. You're going to sit on either side of Elaine Steinbeck. And so we had this wonderful dinner, and I just talked to her, tell me about, John going on the road with the dog. She said, people didn't know how bad his health was. He was not doing well, and he wouldn't live too much longer, but he said, when he said that he was going to take Charlie with him, I said he could go. And so ever since that conversation, it was one of those, I want to get on the road. And so realizing that Washington, after he became president, realized he was a leader of a divided country, he had to do something to unite us. He headed out. And so this was our chance to do a John Steinbeck invitation. So, it was really, we had for us, Melissa had retired. We have a dog named Dora, who you probably have been attacked by or been, had her shake on you at some point. But it was for us, it was, just a way to get out there and see America. Now for you, your book, you had very different circumstances that you set out.
Yeah, I also want to hear, well, I'll ask you a question after I answer.
Okay.
My circumstances were much dimmer. I had just, in a very cold winter, had I live across the bay in South Dartmouth, which I describe to people not from New England as the armpit of Cape Cod. And it was the coldest winter in 100 years, as a fact. And I was carrying a boat for the winter, putting it away in a boathouse, and I slipped and fell, and the gunwale came down on my hands and chopped off the top half-inch of my left hand finger. And so then I was, I first went to our small town urgent care, and they said, "What are you doing? Go to the emergency room." And so I went there, and anyway, I was living back at home on an enormous amount of painkillers, and it was a cold winter. I couldn't go outside, and I looked at my bedside table, and there was the selected journals of Henry David Thoreau, 1837 to 61, which my dad had given me for Christmas. And it was on my bedside table unopened because I had never liked Henry David Thoreau. I think, that laugh tells me I'm not the only one. I think a lot of people have hard experiences with Thoreau. I mean, there's so many vowels in his name, it's hard to pronounce. There's, you're forced to read Walden, Walden's so beautiful, the end line, "The sun is but a morning star." There's some beautiful lines in that book, but mostly, as I describe, he seemed to me like a misanthropic misogynist who wanted to grow beans like Aristotle. And wow, was I mistaken. I opened this book, and I read this description of a field of snow out a window in, say, 1852. He was born in 1817, if anybody doesn't know. And he died so young. He was 44 when he died, so he did most of his writing, in his 30s, which was the age that I was, or am, when that accident happened. And so I read that line of snow. I thought, my God, this is so beautiful. And I turned the page, and I read a description of bubbles caught in ice. And this is something that I still do. I just did it this morning, and I would recommend anybody who wants to feel the vibrance of life, get Thoreau's, especially in Nantucket, because this is his stomping ground, New England, get his selected journals and just follow the days. So I looked up June 17th this morning, and just June 17th, just in his journals, unpublished, he wrote, "The sound of the crickets in the morning is the sound of the earth still dreaming." God, so beautiful. This is a random page. And I realized the whole book was just like a brick of gold. And here is this writer who is really one of our treasures. Something happened in his life, whether it's his intelligence, his relationship with his sisters and his mother, his spirit, the way he was taken under Emerson's wing. It created this lens of a person, and wherever he turned, what filtered through came out in beautiful focus. And so I was having this dark winter, and then by May of that year, it was still, I had horrible Lyme disease. It was just insult to injury that year. And I woke up early in the morning, and by then I had his essay Cape Cod on my bedside table. Before dawn, I just got in the car, drove out to the elbow of Cape Cod, got out with no plan, and just started walking the 20 miles in sand to Provincetown, as Thoreau had done. And the fruit of that walk bore was, it affected me for weeks. I'm still friends with the people whose door I knocked on. I all of a sudden could sleep again. My insomnia went away. And so I just took more and more walks and encountered the most wonderful places and people just by giving myself an assignment.
Yeah. And did you have a notebook with you? Were you just sort of internalizing it? What was your process? Was there a process? Was it just sort of, did you see a book coming? It was just...
No, I didn't see a book coming. I did some sketch. So the book is a real 2-for-1 deal. There's sketches in it. And those drawings actually are in, if anybody is in New York, it's in they're on show right now at a gallery space right near Madison Square Park. I never kept a journal because I felt so embarrassed by my own, I feel like, I don't know if people feel like this, but journal, right, it just seems so, I'm embarrassed by it. Embarrassed by like waking up, like today I woke up. But I wanted to try, and I'm gonna turn a question to you because I've been talking too long. I wanted to try somebody else's habits for a while. And isn't that the most wonderful thing to follow somebody, especially somebody who's gone. I had years ago done Civil War reenacting, and I think in Civil War reenacting, you try to, you follow people or a moment of the past to get out of your own life. I think you'll find that especially if you talk to reenactors, it's fun to just shuck your own life for a weekend and experience something else. But with Thoreau, I found that following him, and for instance, reading the journal, like the June 17th entry that I just said, it somehow brought the colors of my own life in the present moment into focus more vividly. And I could understand my life more vividly by reading somebody like Thoreau. So...
Yes.
So, to answer your question, yes, during those walks, I did journal like him, because I'd, be like Thoreau.
So you'd be at a bar and... Right.
Yeah, there is this passage
Yeah.
in a bar with a enigmatic billionaire who I met, and she was a card, and I would be talking to her and then turn the other side and just write down phrases that she was saying.
Yeah.
Which feels a little sneaky.
Yeah.
But did you, by following, could you have written this book about Washington without following him? Were there unexpected facts, perspectives that came from the road trips? Could you have done this all from your writing studio in Nantucket, or was there something about his life?
You could have. Books have been written about Washington's travels that are pretty much archival based. And Washington kept a diary, but it is not a piece of literary. It's not a masterpiece. It's a good thing there wasn't TripAdvisor, because Washington insisted on staying in public taverns because he was president, but he was a man of the people. He was not going to stay in the homes of his rich friends, and public taverns were not the B&Bs we have today. No waffles in the morning. There were fleas, and as typical a diary entry is bed's terrible, food worse. So it's funny. Washington is notoriously difficult to get under the skin of. He's enigmatic. He stares at us at the from the $1 bill, and what the heck is going on with this guy? And so, I really wanted to approach him through the people he visited, the places he visited. So even before we left, I reached out to all the and this book is actually a love letter to librarians and volunteers and archivists in historical societies, because what I did was, and his New England tour alone, he toured New England, went all the way to Kittery Point. His southern tour took him 3 months, went all the way down to Savannah. And he wasn't Air Force One, it was a horse-drawn carriage. And his New England tour alone, he visited 60 towns. And so I reached out to those towns, to the libraries, to the historical societies, emailed them, called them up, and I said, I'm writing this book. What do you have on Washington's visit to your town? And so even before we headed out, I was just getting inundated with emails and packets of information, some of them newspaper articles, some of them passages from 19th century diaries in which someone who was a kid when Washington came late in life recalls, there is Sarah in Oyster Bay who was she was 6 years old, standing at the gate of her house where they were building a one-room schoolhouse. And they were beginning the roof. And suddenly a really tall guy, Washington was 6'4", which was really tall in the late 18th century. A guy on a big white horse rides by, and it's President Washington. And he sees that they are building this school. He gets off his horse, goes over, and helps them put a rafter in the roof. And then there's 3 cheers. He tips them $1. This is not the Washington on the $1 bill. This is the Washington on the road. And so this was like, wow, this is different. And this is not the Washington I knew about. And so what we did, we developed all these contacts at all these towns. So we'd go to a town. Melissa had Washington's diary spread out on her lap as we were driving along, and and it wasn't deathless prose. It was the bed sucked, and that kind of thing. But you still, I don't know, that sort of vortex of place and history was there. And then we'd often meet like a local history volunteer who would get in the car with us, show us around. And in Holliston, Mass, at least there no longer is, the balancing rock, which, according to tradition, when Washington was going, this rock, it's like kind of a Stonehenge rock that is perched on another rock. And it just looks like it's supposed to fall down. And so, according to tradition, this was not in any history book I had seen, but this was all over Holliston. When Washington came through, and we know he came through because the congregational minister his son late in life would recount the time Washington came by. Washington went to that rock and tried to push it, and it didn't move. But he established a tradition that's been going on ever since. Drunken frat parties, people would push the rock. I pushed the rock when I was there. It was really cool. And I was finishing up the book, literally finishing the epilogue, when I get an email. And this is in 2020. The presidential election is just about to occur. All hell has been breaking loose in this country. We're in the middle of a pandemic. What the heck is going on? I get this email from Joanne at the Holliston Historical Society, and she says, for reasons no one knows, the balancing rock of Holliston has toppled to the ground. I go, holy, what? And so I said, well, I didn't know how to end my book, but now I know. And so what does it mean? She says, what did it mean? I said, I don't know what it means. But it's sort of, this is where, the past and today sort of, intersect in a way where you just go, something's going on here. And I don't know where we're headed, but we set out on this I know we're a divided country. We think we invented partisanship. Remember, there were loyalists and patriots. We have been divided from the very beginning. We were born in a revolution. We've always been fighting this out, and we will. That's what democracy is about. We've all been to town meeting, you know how. But somehow, eventually, people come to a consensus. And we didn't want to, get into barroom brawls with people and see the divisions. We wanted to see what in the past could help us begin to see how we could be united. But the balancing rock of Holliston fell. So I don't know. So we've got a little more time, and I'd just like to know, when one of the characters in your book that I found fascinating was the guy who accompanied Thoreau to Katahdin, as close to a friend as Thoreau had. What kind of, he's an enigmatic character, Thoreau is, but the friend too. It's a very interesting relationship.
Are you talking about his Penobscot guide or Edward?
Edward, I was thinking of.
Yeah.
This is probably a little obscure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose. Can I say something about the revolution first?
Okay,
And
yeah,
this
go
is
ahead.
yeah, it just made me think of this. And it's just such a good Thoreau story. And
Oh,
if
good,
Thoreau
yeah.
was, it's hard to access his prose because they seem old-fashioned, but these stories in the hands of somebody like Bill Bryson would be hilarious. When he walked to Cape Cod, he went to Wellfleet and knocked on, maybe some of you read Cape Cod account, he knocked on the door of this old man who is now famous in the Thoreau, character log as the Oyster Man, and he was a teenager when he heard the sound of the cannons firing across the bay in Boston during the American Revolution, which just sort of like connected very quickly, that time period. We think of Thoreau, and then Thoreau died right before the Civil War, and he was with somebody who's a teenager during the American Revolution, like how quickly that all happened, and how America was snapped into form and then told to move forward, but still so sort of rough around the edges. Anyway, when he's having this very cranky, he is like the typical Yankee, a perfect portrait of an old Yankee. He's cooking Thoreau that morning fried donuts and eel in a big pan, and Thoreau is talking to them, and he has a big wad of chewing tobacco, and as he's talking, every once in a while he spits in the fire, but he's spitting directly into the pan, and Thoreau notices him spitting into the pan, but is such is a good boy who's been raised by his parents well, doesn't mention that, and so he's just it's like a walk in the, it is a Bill Bryson moment. He's talking to this man about the revolution, about America, about the importance, but mostly he's keeping one eye on this like stew of spit that's cooking his own breakfast, and then all of a sudden he just throws the fried eel and the donuts to Thoreau, and he just eats it. It's such a great moment. It's like, oh, what a wonderful...
Well, tobacco-flavored eel. Doesn't that-
Exactly. Then came Thoreau's favorite dish. Yeah, tobacco-soaked eel. What question did you ask me?
Well, I think I like, Thoreau, was he a loner, solitary guy?
Okay, I think if anybody who... And then we will open it for questions. Anybody who reads Henry David Thoreau will leave those journals with one aching desire, and that is to know more about Thoreau's personal relationships. It's very conspicuously absent. He proposed to one woman in his life when he was 21 and she was 17, and he proposed to her after she rejected his brother's proposal. So Thoreau is a strange guy, too. Imagine if your brother proposes somebody, she said no, and then you're like, well, what about me? And actually, I saw something if anybody goes and visits the Concord Museum, maybe there was a spark between them, and this will get to Edward. Because in the Concord Museum, her name was Ellen Sewell, and she was she stayed with the Thoreau family one summer. She was 17 or 18 that summer, and was apparently a very charming young woman. That's when Thoreau, that summer, he wrote the famous line, "The only remedy for love is more love," and he's thinking about Ellen. And there's in the Concord Museum, there's this, I was there doing an event, and there's this little box, and in the box is all these little stones. It's like a little collecting box, all these little stones, and the director of the museum said that box, they think, recent research letters uncovered that box is a box that Thoreau and Ellen shared, and they each collected stones and put them into the box. And there is, they only talk about a ready metaphor, there's fool's gold in the box. Anyway, it's just so touching to see those items. But Edward, his friend, he took along with him. The other question that comes up every couple years is, what was Thoreau's sexual orientation? He was so close to his male friends, and he writes about them with such love. And he is, if anything, I would say mostly he's like scared of sex, and he writes about it in really clear terms. But he does have this really clear and vibrant love for his friends, and one of them is Edward. And Edward also wrote, and he took him up to the Allagash and on a bunch of his trips. And then Edward married somebody and moved over to Italy and then moved back here. But Edward also wrote a line that was so invaluable to me for understanding who Thoreau was. I can't quote it exactly because it's just a small snippet, but it is something like, if you wanted to walk with Henry David Thoreau, you had to start before dawn, walk through the night, pull canoes over the land, and if you got tired in the slightest, he had no more use for you. And it's that quote that I use for people like, didn't Thoreau's mom do his laundry, and wasn't he sort of a soft guy? He was a extremely talented and hardy outdoorsman, and Edward writes about that a lot.
And driven, too. I mean, that's the one, I think we both wrote about enigmatic characters. That, yours was expressive in all these sort of ways. Washington was someone who was trying to build something, actually trying to hide himself behind everything. But Thoreau is too. I mean, that's where I think traveling is such a great thing with these guys, for both of us with this, is because, it does connect you to the real world, the past. It's always there. And I think we're ready to throw it over to the audience for questions, if any of you have questions. Yes?
What do you think your travelers would have made of modern travel and technology, like GPS or audiobooks that we listen to in the car?
That was something, well, when we were following Washington, we started following him from Mount Vernon to New York. When he was on his way to New York for the inauguration. And he was the most reluctant president we've ever had. He did not want to be president, but there really was no one else who had a shot at making this thing work. So he went, but he was convinced he was going to do such a lousy job of it that, here he is, the most famous man in the world at this point. And so felt like a death sentence, he said. And so he just wanted to get this thing over with. And so he's on, and everywhere he goes, they want to have parades and things like that. And he just wants to get it over with. So Melissa and I start following Washington, doing our best to follow the old road, which is now basically Route 1. And it's very different from Washington's day. It's a Miracle Mile, basically all the way to Boston. And it's just miserable traffic, not a hint of the past. And Melissa looks at me and she says, what are we, what is this serving? I said, hey, I'm trying to, whatever. And so she secretly would turn on the GPS, the Google Maps. And, it's always trying to get you on the highway. And so, we'd go along and say, turn left here to get on the on-ramp. And I'd say, shut that damn thing up. No, we're doing this. And then I realized that's the voice of George Washington saying, get this thing over with, get on the highway, and get to New York. So, so that was one of the interactions we had past present travel modes. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's unsurprising that Thoreau would have been allergic to most technology we have today. I think there's this, but how would he have lived today? I think of his line, he said at one point, I find that my body has been in the forest for hours, but my mind is still in the village, which is really illuminating, and we can all relate to, especially when we're trying to get outside. I think Thoreau, well, I think all of us have a complicated nature with, because the outdoors was Thoreau's avenue. I think a lot of us now have a complicated relationship with the outdoors, and we think about it in two big ways. One is like, go to LL Bean or Patagonia, get a backpack and waterproof something, and plan for weeks in advance to stay at some hut somewhere in the White Mountains, and that's the outdoors. The other is what we see in the headlines all the time, that the outdoors is in its final moments, and we're witnessing mass extinction events, and it's a sad things. So those is the sanitized version of getting out in the outdoors, and then that. And I think, so Thoreau's nature, I will say this, is not John Muir's nature. It's really small. It's like, as I've said before, it's like a foot by a foot. It's like the bubbles in the ice, the sound of a cricket. It's the frost around a leaf in fall. He's so particular about what he's pointing out, and all that stuff is stuff that we see every single day around us still, you know? Like a cloud in a high wind torquing overhead is something that Thoreau would describe, and you can still see that now. It's not the Rocky Mountains, it's not, and it's New England, very particular wilderness. So I think you can still have those experiences, whether it's 4 miles from the highway in central Massachusetts or, you know, north of the Arctic Circle. But what you can't have, and what Thoreau would have, is you can't do it for Instagram, or you can't bring your phone along. You have to leave the village. I think the village is our phone now. I think you need to leave the phone, the internet, you have to turn it off. That is essential. It doesn't matter if you're in the Rocky Mountains or if you're in the Berkshires. You just can't bring the village with you.
Yes?
Yes, it's interesting, we think of Thoreau and his journals and being private and solitary and all of that, but there's a part of him where he was a public speaker too, right? He would go to lyceums, and does either of you have any sense of what he spoke of when he came to Nantucket?
Yeah, I think that Betsy probably knows better than we do, being the archival person. I think his the essence of what he said is reported in the paper, because he went out to Sconset.
Yeah, he walked out to Sconset.
Right, because I remember when I was researching Away Offshore, his description of the moors as, you know, basically a prairie surrounded by the sea or something like that. And so he was out there giving talks and things like that, but he wasn't really a barn burner of a orator, was he?
Yeah, that's a fact that I'm sure I could Google right after this, but I don't know. I know it was recorded what he talked about. Yeah. I'm not sure though. You know,
Okay,
fantastic.
please.
He gave a speech, Life Without Principle, which was about,
Right.
you know, working to, it's kind of funny because you think of Nantucket today, mostly with the summer population being extremely wealthy. And he wrote about, or he spoke about the importance of not making money basically a god, and living a life where principle is important, and then following a moral compass, and not to work for the sake of working, you know, not to live to work, but work to live, basically.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm now working on a book about the gold rush, California gold rush, and Thoreau's comments on that. This is the worst thing to hit humanity ever. You know that, you know, the American people heading out for gold. You know, he's just it's you know, so it's interesting. He, you know, in his journals he's so tied to, just like you said, the particulars of nature. But he would write these essays that are, you know, really tackle today's topics. And you have I
used to be executive director of the Thoreau Birdhouse in Concord, so I have like these softball bits of knowledge. He wrote about slavery in Massachusetts. He was a very big abolitionist. In his journals, he wrote, he was one of the people who raised money for John Brown. And in Kansas, he gave a speech in defense of John Brown when they were going to hang him, or maybe before or after, in defense of John Brown's actions. And I can't think of a writer today, a white man from privilege, who put himself out like Thoreau did. When there was the Fugitive Slave Act, where if you knew about a slave and you didn't report it, you would be fined or you'd go to jail. And Thoreau was part of the Underground Railroad with his mothers and sisters, and there were also many freed black people who were part of that in the Concord area too. So who would put themselves out there, their livelihood, going to, jail or being fined, and to write about these very important issues, and to speak about it, and to really walk the walk. And that's what Thoreau did.
Yeah. Thank you. It's intimidating to have you in the audience.
Only for me.
Yes.
Fact check me after.
Yeah, first of all, thank you both. What a great discussion and very enlightening. My question to both of you is, how do you react, or what's your opinion on taking the morality of today's lens and bringing it back in history to look at Washington or Columbus or other people differently with today's lens? Do you subscribe to that, or is it possible to be? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of the essence of my book, really, because I think you've got to let the past be the past to a certain extent. We sit in judgment on the past now. The fact is, in 200 years, people will sit in judgment on what we're doing. When you're in the midst of the future, when you're midst of the present, you're blinded to where things are going. You're just doing your best you can under, everything's a mess. We're on the edge of a precipice. It's always that way. And, people can aspire to do good, but no one completely does good. We all are Washington's a prime example. Here he was a slave owner who knew by the end of his life that slavery was terrible, would say in his cabinet meeting, if this country ever is divided by the issue of slavery, I will go with the northern part, which is an extraordinary statement from a Virginian. But he wouldn't, and he would be the only founding father to free his enslaved workers, but that wouldn't happen until after his death. So you can't let him off the hook. But I also don't think you can completely dismiss him for not living up to the standard we've developed. So, it's a tough one in terms of that, because if we sit in judgment of the past to the point where what these people were trying to accomplish is completely dismissed, we're really doing a disservice to humanity itself. I mean, we're all just a project trying to, work through life, and we fail, we try, and so my approach to history is to try to have as much sympathy for people, even people like George Custer, because and Melville has a wonderful statement in Moby Dick, if we do not know evil, we really do not know life. And so, I don't think it's something to spurn, it's something to learn from.
This is really going to be a Game of Thrones. I have a slightly different
Yeah.
opinion. And this comes from Thoreau. My readings of Thoreau, I think, as the audience member in the front had said, Thoreau was really on the vanguard of so much thought about equality, about what it means and what it can mean, right? And there is so much, I don't know what the word is, but there's so much future in his thought process. And I think one of the most satisfying things about writing about people from the past is that you find out that certain parts of them aren't old-fashioned. They're just uncovering timeless truths. And there are things that there are things that we do that are really old-fashioned. Sitting around the dinner table, listening to live music, the beautiful glow of a fireplace, and that can also exist in thought. So it feels like just a nice, cool bath when you hear Thoreau talking about equality. And
But what about his relationship with the native peoples?
So that's the second part of my, that's the second part of my answer. But I think the other really, and I totally agree with Nat, that you can't, I mean, in terms of specific people, why it's impossible and not very helpful to judge people within the past is here's somebody who is, as I said, on the vanguard of, white Massachusetts abolitionist thought. But somebody, if you actually read his 500-page Maine Woods, speaks about his Penobscot Guide in clear racist terms. And it's not, there's no mistaking it. And in the book, I'm really clear by not calling Thoreau a racist, but presenting his phrases and then saying, this is how he talked about his Penobscot Guide, that an Indian thinks about the world as puffs of smoke compared to the sharpness of a white man's thought. I mean, that is somebody who also publicly defended indigenous rights. And so why I think it's more nuanced than the national conversation we're having about statues or about how to judge from the past, is that you can really see how somebody's own perspective of the time, by honestly believing that he was different from his Penobscot Guide, limited his perspective and drew his own openness closed, and it reduced him a little bit, And it's so nice to be reminded that even if you can publicly and articulately describe your thoughts, that in your daily interactions with somebody, you can still believe in whatever that is, and it does affect Thoreau. And one of my favorite parts from those Maine Woods journals is you can see that his Penobscot guide, Joe Polis, really doesn't like Thoreau that much. And Thoreau's not seemingly aware of it, but there's the amount of times that he says, Joe didn't respond to my question, is a lot.
Well,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.